Our subject for today is a transformational project, the Oxford to Cambridge ARC, which embodies many of the principles that are very close to the Academy's heart, principles such as connectivity, productivity, placemaking, and the environment. I'm going to start by asking Stuart Turner to introduce the subject, and I will then introduce our two speakers. So, Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, Andreas. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'm a member of the Academy of Urbanism and the regional convener. The Oxford-Cambridge ARC is a region that's home to 3.7 million people. I just want to cover very quickly a little bit of the background. In 2017, a report was prepared by the National Infrastructure Commission. This was called Partnering for Prosperity, a new deal for the Cambridge, Milton Keynes and Oxford ARC. The report saw the ARC with its world-class research, innovation and technology would help the UK prosper in a changing global economy. But there was a caveat. Successful growth could be jeopardized by an undersupply of homes. The NIC advocated building up to 1 million homes by 2050. 2019 saw a joint declaration between central government and the local partners. The declaration supported the idea of the ARC as a world-leading economic area. The declaration identified 4 interrelated policy pillars to work, these being productivity, environment, connectivity, and placemaking, of which I think we'll be looking at in more detail than the speakers will cover. The declaration was followed by the 4 enterprise partnerships presenting their own highly ambitious economic vision, namely to be the world leading place for high value growth, innovation, and productivity. So where are we 1 year on in what has been an extraordinary year? 6 questions just to leave for this session and further ones to come. Is the focus on the global ambition still relevant? And will an innovative, knowledge-led economy deliver success and wider prosperity? Will there be support for businesses and for skills? Will the number of new homes required mean the building of new settlements? Is placemaking central to the creation of high quality and inclusive communities? And how will this be managed? Will the infrastructure that is needed to support the communities be delivered? And finally, can the ambition for growth be met, but at the same time, leave the environment in a better and cleaner state for future generations? I said this is the first in a series of lunch hour sessions. This session is called Realising the Global Ambition, Laying the Foundations, and we'll look at the way forward. Further sessions will respond to the 4 policy pillars. I'd like to finish and hand over to Andreas to introduce the speakers. As already said, Andreas is the Director of the Academy of Urbanism and will chair the first session. I'd like to thank everybody from both the AOU and the local partners, and particularly the speakers and the chair for their help. Over to you, Andreas. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. And I should say at this point, this webinar would not have been possible without Stuart's passion and hard work. So thank you very much, Stuart. Today's speakers, I start with Councillor Barry Good, who is the leader of Cherwell District Council and also the chairman of the ARC Leaders Group. Barry will talk about the ARC governance, the growth board, and how the local partners are responding to this huge challenge. The second speaker is Martin Tugwell, who many years ago, when I first met him, had been director of the South East England Regional Assembly. He has also been Deputy Director for Growth and Infrastructure at Oxfordshire County Council. And he is currently the President of the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation, as well as, of course, the head of England's Economic Heartland, which is the premise of his presentation for today, having just published the transport strategy for the whole corridor. Without further ado, can I hand the floor over to our first speaker, Barry Good.
Well, thank you very much. It's useful in a way, I think, that this is a virtual event today, because the slides that I am showing you have a lot of small font text in them. But with this format, you should be able to read them on your screens, especially if you squint. You will receive a copy afterwards anyway to peruse at your leisure. I shan't therefore proceed to read them out to you, but rather pick a few key messages, which I think are, if you like, the key ones for you to take away. The slides show the quite complex internal governance structure of the leadership group, the work streams we are actively pursuing, and the key principles that guide this work. In a way, you can always rely on local authority folk to be heavy on structures, but it is the delivery of actual work that dominates my attention now that these structures are embedded. This means I will deviate a little from the slides to indicate the how, not just the what. Next slide, please. The geography of the arc shown on this map is hopefully familiar to you. It is confirmed by government and adhered to by the leadership groups that I chair. It is Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Northamptonshire, Milton Keynes, Bedfordshire, and Cambridgeshire, including Peterborough. There are areas adjacent who are a bit miffed at exclusion, but sticking to these well understood areas has merit. The arc is quite often name-checked by ministers, so have no doubt that it remains a national economic priority area, as first designated by the National Infrastructure Commission, even in the context of a levelling up backdrop agenda today. Next slide, please. The ARC leadership groups shown here have been invited by government to be ambitious in our support for ARC-wide collaboration, as well as to develop ARC-wide investment proposals across our work streams. Collaboration is the key here. That is not automatic, of course. It is my role to encourage and foster that spirit and protect that principle. We are a coalition of the willing, so not a statutory joint committee. To note here the key role of growth boards. These are very much new kids on the block, and it's important that these mature and give us a strong link to the chunks of economic geography that make up the arc as a whole. Note also that we are not just local authorities. The collaboration of and with the enterprise partnerships and the universities gives the groups as a whole more breadth and scope and resilience. Next slide, please. This slide, if you can actually read it, simply illustrates the governance in a wiring diagram. Note the close connection illustrated by the white arrow between the ARC executive and the government team. Close cooperative work between the centre and the stakeholders, all in collaboration, not competition, is, I suggest, a reflection of other combines, such as the mayoral systems seen elsewhere in England. In a way, success breeds imitation. The green eggs at the bottom are our current work streams, which I will come to in a moment. Next slide, please. These are our current priorities. There is much to do. Note particularly our commitment to a green arc and the obvious linkages between these priorities. To achieve a spatial framework that values natural capital, addresses climate change, whilst building an economy that recognises the key role of this geography has to play in a national post-COVID recovery strategy. That is the challenge. The work on the economic prospectus that's mentioned here, whilst linked to recovery, is the shark nearest to the boat right now. It is being masterminded for us by the LEP pillar acting together. This is well advanced and on time. Next slide, please. Here then are the 4 work streams shown previously, with the key driving principles set out in detail. Note that these feed into, as you would hope and expect, into a spatial framework. In short, the principles here will hold good across our whole expectation and ambition. I've hinted already about these, but emphasise particularly for you today: productivity, placemaking, sustained investment, and tackling climate change. My view is that these are not contradictory. Or more accurately, I don't think the leadership group will fall into a trap of allowing them to become contradictory. I turn now to how we resource these 4 work streams. Productivity is led by the LEPs acting together. Placemaking is led by planning officers from our local planning authorities. Connectivity is led by England's economic heartland, and you will hear more of this after me. Environment is led by local government officers with strategic involvement from DEFRA. In conclusion then, to have a role, a constructive and collaborative role, in developing and then actually delivering these key themes and priorities is both a challenge and an opportunity for the ARC leadership group. For my part as chair, I'm absolutely committed to doing all I can to ensure we do not squander this opportunity, and that collectively and collaboratively we step up to this great and ambitious challenge. Here ends the lesson, Chair. I'm very pleased to take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Barry. Can I invite Martin now to give us his presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. And it's good to be able to follow on from Councillor Woods. I think Councillor Wood has set out quite nicely the strategic ambition, and what I'll talk to you today about is one aspect of that, which is the draft transport strategy, which in itself forms part of the connectivity strand moving forward. The transport strategy is a 30-year vision. We published it on the 14th of July and it's currently out for consultation. And we quite deliberately talk about it being about connecting people and transforming journeys, because we passionately believe there is a moment in time to shape the future in ways that we have perhaps thought we would like to, but haven't been able to achieve in the past. If I kind of reflect on the last few months, what it's kind of reminded us is that there's nothing fixed about the need to travel or indeed the way we travel. We've seen many businesses using flexible and remote working to maintain their businesses, but equally there are large parts of the economy where bringing people together safely remains an important part of the daily routine. And likewise, if we think about our own individual lives, different ways of doing things, keeping in touch with people, but fundamentally being able to meet friends, experience life, visit places, transport remains important. And so this opportunity to shape the future is important moving forward. Next slide, please. Just very quickly to kind of give you a sense of geography, England's economic heartland, one of 7 STBs across the country, established in 2014, slightly bigger than the ARC membership, but don't get worried about that because you need to look at the linkages across boundaries anyway. The most important thing is here, we're here to work with and as part of the ARC to realise the economic potential and to do that in a way that delivers on net environmental gain. The philosophy of England's economic heartland is quite simple. It's about looking at strategic issues that genuinely cross across boundaries and need to be dealt with on a collaborative basis. It's about tackling issues that need to be done and sharing experience. And it's being part of that team that makes the case to government for looking at and in making the case for investment. And increasingly, the reason why we talk about connectivity is you cannot look at any one individual part of the infrastructure agenda in isolation. The work that we've done recently on pathways to decarbonisation has shown if you want to achieve the decarbonisation of the transport system, you need to align what you do with transport, with digital infrastructure, and indeed with the energy supply systems. The next slide, please. So what you see in the next couple of slides are a couple of illustration of the capability that we have as a unit. I have 9 full-time employees. We have a budget of comes from our partners and supplemented by funding from government. And in publishing the transport strategy, we draw upon a wealth of information and knowledge on the region. We've published an integrated sustainability appraisal alongside it. And we've had great input from both the productivity work stream and the environment work stream that Councillor Wood talked about earlier. Fundamentally, if you look at the success of the region, yes, we are successful, but congestion has increased, environmental impact of transport has increased. We need to think about the resilience and reliability of our transport system. And whilst productivity is high compared with many parts of the UK, in terms of global competition, there's still a long way to go. So we can't take economic success for granted. And just like any business, we need to keep investing to maintain our success and indeed to make sure we continue with it moving forward. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate, regional evidence base is an important part of the work that we do across the region. We have a database which captures all the planned local development, including both housing and economic growth. It allows us, for example, to understand that within the local plan system already, there are some 535,000 houses planned, an increase of some 25% on the current housing stock. We've also done work using to segment the population. So when we look at the transport strategy, when we think about the opportunities of the future, it's very much around a user-centered perspective. So if you're going to have that as your focus, then we need to have an understanding of people's behaviors and patterns. So we've used information from Mosaic's, Experian Mosaic's database, and we've used that to understand the personas of people right across the region, and indeed use that information to create tools that allow us and our partners to develop things moving forward. Worth reminding ourselves that as a region, some 35% of the population live in the network of small market towns and surrounding rural areas. That poor connectivity in those areas is actually quite a barrier for many to economic success. And indeed, those barriers, connectivity barriers, apply equally in our urban areas. We use it as an example of don't take things for granted. In Oxford, where I live, the difference in average life expectancy between those that are in the most popular, the more economically successful areas and those which are perhaps struggling, the difference in life expectancy is 15 years and growing. So we've got inequalities and levelling up agenda just as much in a successful region as we have in the rest of the country. The next slide, please. So that means that in terms of the vision, we've got to set out a change of direction. We've got to have a step change in our approach. We've got to focus on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and recognize that infrastructure has to enable those outcomes to be delivered, which is why we've made it very clear in our vision. It's about sustainable growth. It's about improving quality of life and well-being. And it's harnessing the innovation and the centers of excellence that we've got within the region. Very much as Councillor Wood said, making this a green economic recovery and not just an economic recovery. Next slide, please. So the final couple of slides, I'm going to just kind of give you a flavour of what we're saying in the transport strategy and some of the opportunities, which I think for the Academy are kind of perhaps pertinent. We've got to use this user-centred approach to redefine what we need our transport system to do. How does it contribute to an outcome that we're looking for our region? As I mentioned earlier, we've seen an increase in the use of remote and flexible working. We've seen an acceleration in the rise of e-commerce. So more and more people are about looking for services and opportunities to come to them rather than for them to travel to those places. So we've got to get our head around here that travel patterns are changing. They're changing because of our behaviors as consumers. And it represents an opportunity of us as policy and with Councillor Wood and the political leaders, decision makers, to think about what is it we need to do moving forward. So focus on decarbonisation, use of digital infrastructure. Can't ignore the fact though that we still need to think about how we move people around the region. So that's where iconic transformational infrastructure like East-West Rail and the Cambridgeshire Autonomous Metro are major catalysts for change, not just in terms of transport, but in the opportunities they provide for focusing sustainable growth in and around them as hubs. But if you're going to do that, you've got to improve the local connectivity. And of course, the work that we've seen in the last few months with the emphasis on improving active travel, making it easier for people to walk and cycle, those are issues and opportunities we need to build on moving forward. One of the areas we touched on very early in the work on the draft transport strategy is indeed freight and logistics, and it's something that's often forgotten. But if we just take a step back and think about what I said a few minutes ago, how people are expecting things, services to come to them rather than for them to have to go to where the shops and the outlets are, then there are implications for local distribution. There are implications for our urban environment. We need to think about how we repurpose our transport system to accommodate more freight and logistics in our urban areas, but of a different nature. Next slide, please. So some of the opportunities that come, and building on some of the messages I've already touched upon, we've got to think about how we seize the opportunity that we've got at the moment. And we've got to think about what it means for the way in which we talk about and think about investment. We've got an opportunity, we've seen in the last few weeks and months that economic growth can continue in places without the need to move. And that's pretty fundamental, because if you think about a way we approach investment in infrastructure, it's traditionally been economic growth means more people moving about, means more people in the peak hours, means you need to invest in capacity for peak hour travel. Well, that's not going to happen. And actually, if we're going to achieve decarbonisation, we've got to break that link. You're seeing a smoothing of the peak. So traffic levels are typically back up to around about 80–85%, but we've not seen the rise in the morning peak because the nature in which people are travelling is changing. And there are implications there for what we do. And we've seen the acceleration in e-commerce with the retails and the high street, again, continuing to be challenged because of what we do as consumers. Now, that provides us with an opportunity to repurpose our urban areas. Are we thinking about, do we need to think about how we bring more people back into our urban areas as places to live? Do we think about how we make them as social places? If we do that, again, there are consequences in terms of the transport we need moving forward. More emphasis on local connectivity, more emphasis on the strategic moving forward. I've touched on about how we connect our urban areas and the local connectivity. But for me, one of the things we have to think about is how we restore confidence in our public transport system moving forward. Because fundamentally, the challenges we face, economic growth, but doing it in a way that doesn't have an environmental impact, remain. And final slide, please. So the draft transport strategy is out there. Consultation runs through until the 6th of October. We'd love to hear your thoughts and your perspectives on this, irrespective of where you are in the country, because the issues and the themes are ones which we think are universal to the transport system and our urban areas moving forward. If you are in the area, then we particularly would like to hear your thoughts on the vision and the way forward. And the intention then is to have the final version of this published by the end of the calendar year and contribute to the work that the wider ARC initiative is doing and delivering economic success and prosperity for residents and businesses alike. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you to Barry and thank you to Martin. Lots of points raised, and as we said at the beginning, we're dealing with a very transformative project, and naturally there are so many questions to ask. I'm going to use the chair's prerogative and ask the first one, even though my question is in two parts. So I wanted to ask, we didn't get a sense of the timescale for the project. Obviously, you can't say it's going to be built and finished in 5 years' time or whatever, but I would like to all of us to get an understanding of the likely timescale and different stages for the project. And then the second part to that is how you, the two of you who are central to this, feel about the government support for the project. Is it still there despite other crises and preoccupations? And do you feel confident that you are moving in the right direction? So who's going to go first? Martin, you go.
I'll defer to Councillor Wood first.
Yes. Okay, Barry.
Yes, I think that it's in terms of time scales, there are scales inside the scales. Mm-hmm. So the ultimate objective is 2050 to meet the NIC expectations or go some way towards them. Some targets are really stretched, but the idea is 2050 is the end game. But of course, by the time we get there, I'm not sure it'll necessarily include me. By the time we get there, the other targets will have come down the track. But there are smaller targets, and right now the nearest target to me is comprehensive spending review for the government in the autumn, if there is still going to be one. And so that there are always things right up against you to keep your feet to the fire, and that, I think, that's the way of life. In terms of government support, yes, I am confident about government support. It was necessary, and I absolutely understand why a large number of civil servants had to be diverted from their core departments and their core responsibilities to the COVID crisis. It's quite right too that happened. But they are in terms of the ARC, the team are now reassembled, and there is a strong commitment. There's never been a weak commitment from government, but they have to resource things the same way the rest of us do. And so now that is coming back on stream, and we have a very good and professional relationship with officials. And so yes, I'm very confident about government support.
Okay, thank you. Martin, is there anything you want to add to?
So really building on what Councillor Wood has said, I mean, the time horizon for the draft transport strategy is likewise 2050. It's recognising we need to set that direction out. I think what we need to see is some of the transformational infrastructure that we've talked about being delivered, and we're seeing progress on some elements of that. But I mean, none of us, I think, are in under any illusion that the spending review will be very tough. there will be lots of demands on what will be increasingly a tight budget nationally. We need to keep making the case, and this is where the economic prospectus is really important. We need to make the case that investing in economic success is actually not just good for the region, it's actually good for the UK. The strategic infrastructure we're talking about not only transforms what we can do in the region, it allows levelling up across the entire country. The strategic routes we have are actually providing links from the south and London into the Midlands and vice versa. I think my kind of observation at the moment, Chair, is that we're seeing in the last few weeks, we've seen proposals from the government about how to accelerate and how to speed up the planning process. I think my observation is I'd like to see that same vigour and focus being attached to accelerating the planning and the delivering of strategic infrastructure. We know the one thing that concerns political leaders, communities and businesses more than anything else is the plans for growth come forward, but the delivery of infrastructure is that beat behind, which then creates problems in the short to medium term.
Thank you. In fact, this last point was raised by a question just now, and it's to do really with the map you showed at the very beginning showing the arc and all the the neighbors to the arc, how they feel about the project, and do they feel excluded? And more widely, the question from Saffron is, isn't this completely contradictory to the government's levelling up agenda? Because it feels a little exclusive rather than the kind of levelling up that the government has been promoting. Do you feel pressures like that, and how do you respond to these points? Councillor Wood?
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you. Two distinct questions. I did hint about neighbours to the as it were, the county lines of, although that's used in a different context these days, of the arc geography. And yes, I think immediate neighbours do watch very closely, you know, with a I suppose, a suspicion that they might be missing out on something if they're the wrong side of a line on a map, and that's natural. But there's no, it's not a wide-scale, you know, write letters to MPs kind of thing. It's just a watch this space mood, and that brings us to the second part of the question, which is, well, is there going to be a special benefit, a special case? Is there a real benefit of being inside that boundary anyway, in terms of a levelling up agenda and that kind of thing? And the answer is, I think there probably will be an advantage, and that's what motivates a lot of us to do the work necessary to exploit that advantage. And yeah, I mean, I understand that the government has got to think about how it levels up, but I think there is an argument that says that you still need to have engines of growth, engines that are natural expansion areas anyway, that need to do that well and properly, and need to optimize, maximize their potential for the national exchequer and for the economy as a whole. And so I don't think that balance between central government objectives will be lost.
Thank you, thank you. Martin, is there anything you want to add, or shall we? There's lots of other questions. Yep.
I think the only thing I would observe, Chair, is that once you start working at a scale which allows you to think about some of the big strategic issues, you get into the conversations about what are the linkages, and you look at it naturally. So we look at how do you connect the sort of central part of the region with the communities in the Midlands and the East Midlands? How do you kind of make it easier to connect to the Cambridgeshire area into the East Midlands? These are valuable not just from our perspective, but actually valuable in part of that levelling up at a national level. So I think you get the conversations. I think you because you work at scale, you can have those conversations more easily than you realise. And as I touched on in my overview, there's levelling up to be done within the region, even in some of those parts of the region where you think there shouldn't be a problem. There are fundamental challenges which we need to address.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I bring in Claire San Martin, who picked up on one of your points, Martin, about the traffic during the peak hours. Claire, would you like to ask your question?
Reduction in the peak travel time being sustained. Do you think there's been a real change in people's behaviour that you now need to plan for? And if you think it is that people are going to change very much how they travel at what times of the day, is there really more capacity in the infrastructure than you thought there was pre-COVID?
Thank you, Claire. Mm-hmm.
So if I might, Chair, I mean, part of my response to that will be, well, I won't presume to speak on behalf of others, but I just know my travel behaviours have changed. Do I want to necessarily go back to what I did? And actually, the way we work allows me to have different choices. So I don't think so much as about what do we think will happen. It's more a question of what do we want to happen. If we want to make it easy for people to continue to work from home, then investing in digital infrastructure rather than physical infrastructure might be more appropriate. And we have seen great that the internet connections have withstood the demand. There are still many areas where we need to do more. And if you think about behaviours, then people have had their confidence about the way they've travelled knocked. Some people would want to actually say, I don't want to go back to a 2-hour commute. I don't want to, I don't need to. So why do we assume that they will actually go there if we want to create a better place moving forward? The interesting about peak time, I think, is really interesting, because if we think about the challenge around perhaps public transport, what is it that people don't particularly like about public transport in the old regime and they prefer now with their private car? It's safety, it's security, it's comfort. So let's take it as an opportunity. Let's step up and make the investment in public transport to actually make it an attractive option. I was in there's some very interesting work being done by Transport Focus, looking at a weekly basis of attitudes. What's really interesting is that if people are starting to experience public transport again, their confidence in safety is going up markedly because they can see for themselves it's okay. The challenge is for those people who still have to make that first step back onto public transport, for whom it is still quite a barrier. So we can offer a product there. We can smooth out the peak, makes it easier to make public transport more viable in the longer term. And we need to do it anyway, because public transport, shared transport has to be the way forward if we're going to deliver decarbonisation and net environmental gain as well as economic growth.
Okay, in fact, our next question is from Saffron, and it's exactly to do with that point, Martin, who is asking a little bit more detail about the transport proposals for the ARC and how they will deliver the decarbonisation agenda that you spoke about. Saffron, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yeah. So Martin, I mean, it seems like, I'll just read what I said. Has the new infrastructure proposed been modelled with respect to its sustainability? It feels like this very grand plan requires a lot of concrete to be poured over some of England's finest farmland.
So there you go, Martin. How do you respond to that?
So I think what I touched on in briefly, but which I'd commend everybody to have a look at, alongside the draft transport strategy, is the draft integrated sustainability appraisal, which brings together elements of strategic environmental appraisal, health impact, quality impact, so a whole raft of considerations there. We've also published our Pathways to Decarbonisation piece of work that was undertaken in conjunction with the University of Oxford and University of Southampton, using the national infrastructure model and looking at what do we need to achieve to get to a certain target by 2050. The challenge, what we've done at a strategic level, is set out the agenda for change. How that will be delivered will be working with partners. And we've got a couple of tools to help us there. One is, in addition to the database, which tells us where we are and what we know now, we have a regional policy scenario model. So we can play tunes on thinking about the scale of growth, the distribution of growth, the impact of policy levers to actually make a difference, and look at what it means in terms of outcomes. So you can actually get some sense of a direction of travel, and whether one particular scenario gives you more chance of going in a direction than others. At the same time, I mentioned about the segmentation of the population, and our partners are using a tool that we've developed which allows them to think about, well, actually, at a local level, if we start doing these things, can we achieve better outcomes? And it's a reflection of the fact that the population is different in Cambridge compared with Milton Keynes, compared with Oxford, compared with Northampton. You cannot have one size fits all. So what we've done with the strategy is set out the need for change. We've set out the direction of which we have to achieve that change. We've set out and have the tools that allow us and our partners to understand what it means at a local level. But fundamentally, in terms of developing the detail, it's got to be done at the local level. But I would not underestimate the importance of setting out at the strategic level, because unless we change the way we appraise things, we will end up with the same solutions. We do not appraise and make the same case for investing in digital infrastructure in the same way that we would do for a major new road scheme. And yet for a 21st century economy, majority of businesses would say, I'd much rather you spend money on digital infrastructure so I can get my services to my customers, so I can get connectivity, than perhaps making it by a physical connection. And we've got to use the strategy to change the mindset, to break the link that economic growth means moving people and building capacity in the peak hours, when actually the pattern of what we do as individuals is changing. And what do we want to shape it moving forward?
Thank you, Martin. Quite a comprehensive answer. I'm going to go to Stuart now, who wants to take us back to one of the primary points that we spoke about, which is that the intention to make this into a global economy. You know, there is this ambition that this will stand out as a project. So, Stuart, would you like to ask your question, please?
I need to unmute. Thank you, Andreas. What I've always found interesting about the Oxford-Cambridge ARC proposal was that there was a very, very clear focus on a knowledge-led economy. That seemed very sound, and I believe does seem very sound still, but it does mean that we're reaching out not only to Europe in a different way, but also to the whole of the globe. That has clearly changed, but my question to both the speakers, do they see that still to be relevant? And if so, how have things changed to allow us to really reach out and benefit from the potential, the knowledge that we have in this region to really make us a leading global economic region?
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. Councillor Good, would you like to take this question?
It's a very good question. I'm almost tempted, Chair, to say, oh, you better give me one on sport. But I think the basic point that I take is that, yes, there has always been, as Stuart says, a focus on a knowledge-led economy because of the basic knowledge assets that are so fantastic that already exist. You would be silly not to focus on that. Exactly how that then proceeds to be exploited and, for the sake of a word, expanded in a truly meaningful way is the key to the door, and that is part of the work that LEPs and the university sector are leading on in respect of the economic prospectus for the ARC as a whole. So we'll be in a position to answer Stuart's questions relatively soon with a lot more detail than I have at my fingertips this morning.
Okay.
This afternoon.
Thank you. There's 2 or 3 questions now about the actual delivery of infrastructure. I'm going to kick this section off by asking Rose Sutton. Rose Sutton, please, to ask you a question.
Hi, yeah, my question was around, I think it was a point that you raised earlier, Martin, on how infrastructure delivery always seems to be a step behind the actual proposed developments when they go through. So you do the development and then you look at building the infrastructure to sustain it. When the delivery of infrastructure, the funding for it is so entwined with the developer contributions that are often negotiated as part of the process, as part of the development process, how do you think that we could address this moving forward?
So there's kind of 3 things that strike me, and I think you need to kind of separate out that not all infrastructure is funded in the same way. So if we think about some of the proposed changes around the planning white paper and and the changes they're talking about, infrastructure levies, etc., we need to make sure that as those are brought forward, they actually allow us to make the investment. And indeed, it's interesting to see how the government's proposals are talking about allowing local authorities to potentially borrow on the basis in advance of those funds being coming forward. That feels to me, you know, very an interesting way of actually kind of addressing some of this. We need to also then think about the more strategic infrastructure. So at one level, we need to make sure we need to make the plans that Highways England and the National Network Rail have align with what we're doing. That's the added value of having a subnational transport body with an investment pipeline. It's the added value of why making it a statutory subnational transport body. You cannot ignore this. It gives the region's partners a strong voice, a stronger voice in making sure that our investment actually is reflected in the investment of those bodies. And I have to say, at a working level, throughout the development of the draft transport strategy, the work we are doing with both Network Rail and Highways England gives me good cause to be hopeful in that respect. The one that I kind of think we often forget about and which we kind of focus on as part of the wider strategic infrastructure is actually some of the utilities. Now, you know, the way the regulatory framework works, you know, user pays, but you have to have the demand before you actually make the investment. And yet we know the growth is coming. So we need to make the investment plans for utilities be able to invest ahead of the curve so that you don't get a situation where a major development is frustrated because you haven't yet provided the substation or the power supplies more generally. Now that's the added value of coming together as a region, because every single local authority has that problem. And if we have the same problem, it's a single message going into government and working with the regulators to see how we achieve that. It might mean we need to go back to some of the work that we did in previous incarnations of regional levels, where you had investment funds available up front to act as a catalyst that are then recovered and recycled. We've had, in previous roles, I've had experience of that. It can work, and it can work very effectively. So I think it's recognizing there are different elements here, but the fundamental point is strong regional voice, clear messages, and then engaging with government and the bodies at a national level to make it happen for us. Okay, I will read out the next question just to save time. Again, it's on delivery. Will the number of new homes required mean the building of new settlements? Has that been decided yet, or is that still? You mentioned a figure, I think, of was it 500,000 or so new homes along the arc? I mean, it may be more appropriate. I mean, we focus on infrastructure, so maybe more appropriate, yes, from Councillor Wood to answer that. Yes.
Yeah, it's to be determined is the short answer, but you can't escape the likelihood of new settlements, in my opinion. The way to look at it is like this, though. The government via the NIC has promulgated a long-term housing target for the ARC of up to 1 million homes by 2050. But that kind of scares the horses a lot. And the way I look at it is, you need to break it down into likely time periods. So if it was, up to 2030, up to 2040, up to 2050, and the current planned growth in the ARC up to 2030 or thereabouts is of the order of 300,000. So it's easy to see how incremental steps would get you to a figure that you could claim was up to, in the region of up to 1 million extra homes. But things will change as you go along, obviously. I think the point is, though, that where there needs to be a lot of thought is about where there could be things like development corporations, because there are 3 already being thought about, processed. It's about the potential of a market towns or urban extension, and how that can be done in a way that's sustainable and that fits climate change targets, and that is where there is also places for people to work as well as to live, because you don't necessarily want to build just a big commuter belt. And then there's about how you would, because some rural village style settlements can do with some additional housing, because they're aging and services are falling away, and there are a lot of social reasons why that also makes sense. So all of these things have to go into the mix. I can't give you an easy answer that says, no, yes, there'll be 6 and there'll be here.
It's a very complex and complicated issue, isn't it? In fact, the next question is again very relevant. How do you make placemaking central to this plan with all these conflicting parameters and interests and considerations? How do you think you're going to achieve good placemaking? Do you have any specific kind of program in order for you to be more successful than we have been elsewhere so far?
I think the easiest answer, these questions are extremely complicated, but the easiest answer to say is you can do it. It's not impossible. You need to build on best practice. And I would say this, wouldn't I? If you look at places like Bicester, which is a healthy new town now, and will retain a strategic delivery board for that whole place that is going to double in size, and you have to do that well, and you have to do that in such a way that you build in changes to lifestyle and that you make it a place that people want to live in and like living in. And there's a huge quantity of good practice that can be imported from across the country to make good placemaking work, and that really is you just have to research it and do it well, and it's not impossible.
Okay, we are running a little bit out of time. Still more questions to come. Very, very quickly, can I ask Cameron Abbey to ask your question, please? Cameron Abbey. Just to save time. Yeah.
I was wondering if the regional plan will be devised, or because I don't really want if it were a stitched up approach will be kind of like created.
So the question is, will a regional plan be developed? Is there a quick answer to that one? Looking at my watch,
I can say that the current thinking is no. and that because but that was before last week, and the complete change to the national planning arrangements that are being consulted on. But no, the way the vision is that that local planning authorities will retain their statutory duty to plan in their own areas, but that the growth boards and the ARC as a whole will be able to, for the sake of argument, give a overarching backdrop that will gain in its weight as in the planning system as time goes by.
Okay, I'm going to give the last word to Saffron, whom we've had before, asking about investment in places like Stoke-on-Trent and Aberdeen. Saffron, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, from what my understanding, I'm an economic geographer, I guess. I studied at Oxford, and my concern is Oxford, Cambridge, particularly, are already very, very successful areas. Oxford particularly has quite severe constraints on its ability to expand. You know, there are housing problems well known at Oxford, and what it seems to be doing is you're kind of conjoining. This would be my critique. It's not necessarily, I don't think it should go ahead, but the critique is you're joining two places that are very successful with Milton Keynes as well, high GVAs in all those. You're putting a huge amount of money into this project. When you put maybe even less than that money, put that money into Stoke-on-Trent or around Manchester, or to connect Manchester and Leeds, or around Grimsby, you would get a far better return on your investment than the money spent on the Oxford Arc, which already, the Oxford-Cambridge Arc, which already are very significant wedges around London as its hub. And
thank you.
That's my concern.
Okay, yeah. So quite a challenging point. Very quick answer from our two speakers.
Well, I think we touched on this earlier. It may be that the arguments about levelling up will override the ones about well, surely you should optimise the value of your natural growth areas. My view is that a balance will be struck between those two aspects, and that's why there remains an emphasis to do well that's going to happen anyway.
Yeah. Martin, do you want to say anything? Or?
I'll just go back to the point I made in the presentation. Yeah. Yeah. If you treat the economy like a business, like a shop, if you don't keep investing, if you don't keep growing and be successful, you go backwards. And as one of the few regions in the country that generates a surplus to the exchequer, a large amount of the money which is actually looking to help other parts of the country is generated by successful regions. So it's not about one region over the other. It's about making sure we protect the economy, grow it, benefit the residents and businesses in the region, but also help share that with the rest of the country.
Very good point to end up on. Can I start by thanking Stuart for helping me with this webinar, and also Stephen and Olga for handling the whole admin and setting everything up. But in particular, I'd like to thank our two speakers, Martin Tugwell and Councillor Barry Good. I hope you all agree with me. We've had a very interesting, scintillating 1 hour. And all that remains for me to say is thank you for joining us, and have a good afternoon, everyone.